Townes Van Zandt was a traveling troubadour whose body of work rivals that of any writer. His songs came from his life, and he lived his life with a robust abandon that made those songs some of the finest literature of the 20th century. This is the story of a true Texas legend, Townes Van Zandt. Townes, where were you born and where'd you grow up?
Well, Larry, I was born in Fort Worth in 1944, March 1944, and I lived there till I was about 10, and I moved out to Midland, Texas for about a year and a half, and then we moved to Billings, Montana for about 3.5 years, and then to Colorado, and then to a little place out of Chicago called Barrington, at which point I went away to a private high school for 2 years, and by the time I got out of high school, my parents had moved back to Houston, and I went to the University of Colorado from high school. So mostly Texas. I would say forever a Texan, you know, and secondly, Colorado. I spent a lot of time in.
Did you?
And I hope to see again someday.
Did you start writing as a young boy, write poetry and things like that? Or?
Oh, well, in high school, I did. We had a serious old English teacher who made us memorize Shakespeare. You know, and being a private school, it was like 8 or 10 boys in a class, you know, that kind of education. Half of the guys were there because they couldn't be handled anywhere else, and half of the guys were there because of athletic ability, and, you know, some were there because of scholastic ability. And I kind of felt in between, pretty much.
So as a result of that education, you were steeped in the classics, all the great poets and Shakespeare and all that?
I think a lot more so than public schools do. And I can remember I wrote a play when I was a senior, and I wrote some sonnets. You know, just the rhyme scheme is so weird. I just want to see if I could do it and make any sense out of it, which I have these days. I have a couple of songs like that. I came upon a strange rhyme scheme, and just almost academically wanted to see if I could follow it through without throwing away any lines, you know, and still have it make sense.
Had you picked up a guitar by high school? Were you putting your poems to music?
I started, I guess, shortly after the Christmas, after I saw Elvis Presley on the Ed Sullivan Show, which I would have been 9 years old, I guess. And I saw that show with my older sister and her 2 girlfriends, because we had one of the few TVs in the neighborhood back then. And I saw the effect that Elvis had on these girls. And by that time I was starting to realize girls were somehow different than boys. And I watched Elvis drill these young ladies, and I just figured, wow, he's got all the money in the world, and he can have any car that he wants, and these girls love him, so there must be something to the guitar. So I asked my father if I could have one for Christmas. He said, well, if I promised to learn Fraulein, first song. And I promised him I would, and I did, and I got one for Christmas, and still sing Fraulein.
Do you recall the first time you played something that you wrote yourself for an audience that wasn't your family?
Well, pretty much. It was at the Jester Lounge in Houston, Texas, out Westheimer. And it was kind of the tail end of the folk boom, kind of the very tail end. But it was still going on enough to where the Jester would have 5 or 6 people play on any given night, you know, 3 or 4 songs each. And it would be full almost every night. You know, and the cover charge was $2 or whatever. K.T. Oslin played there. Guy Clark played there. And
mid-'60s, right?
And about 65, I guess, 64 or 5. And I played there, and I ended up, there were these folks that had come up from the serious traditional folk ranks, kind of. Guy Clark was singing Cotton Mill Girls and, you know, whaling ballads and traditional folk stuff. And Frank Davis, famous Houston character, was singing real traditional stuff and some lead belly. And they all played it and sang it better than I could, so I figured I needed just some different stuff. And I started writing. The first about 15 or 20 songs were kind of geared for the beer crowd. You know, kind of some of them off color and a lot of talking blues and this, that, and the other. I mean, seriously geared for the beer crowd. I became the house opening act at the Jester, and they would bring people through, so I got to see all these people. I got to see Alan Dameron in his prime, and he really impressed me. It still does, I'm sure, a serious show, you know, entertainer-wise. That was all right. And I got to see Doc Watson, and I got to meet Lightning Hopkins. And this whole time, and Jerry Jeff Walker, and opening for these guys. I just kind of began to realize that if I was going to the University of Houston at that time, and I was seriously being torn between staying in school and pre-law and playing the guitar. And the guitar like slowly won out. It was a case of law school losing out as much as the guitar winning out.
Now, Bob Dylan had been around for 4 or 5 years then, releasing records. Had he been any influence on your writing at all?
Well, he was a big influence in that. Jerry Jeff was a big influence because of all those people that I played with and opened for, Jerry Jeff was kind of the first one that really wrote his own stuff back when Little Bird, you know, his own songs, Ramblin' Gamblin', stuff like that. And I realized that that's what I'd been doing. I'd just been doing kind of a lighter version of it all. And then I think I clicked in. I started writing trying to write more serious stuff then, which turned out was not hard. It kind of was where I should have been, or it's where I evolved to. And I remember distinctly the first serious material I ever wrote was Waiting Around to Die, which is...
A lot of your songs are just beautiful love songs. What was the inspiration for If I Needed You? Where'd that song come from?
Well, it is a pretty simple song. A lot of people play it at weddings, I found out. And it so happens that that song is unique in the fact that it's the only song that I ever wrote in my sleep. I was dead asleep. And it was kind of a weird sleep. I was staying with Guy Clark and Susanna Clark in this little teeny house over in East Nashville. And somebody got the flu, and so we immediately, all three of us had the flu. And we were getting a bottle of codeine cough syrup every day, you know. I was coughing, my eyes were running. I mean, if anybody ever needed it, and they still looked at me like scum of the earth. But anyway, so my sleep was just saturated with these technicolor dreams, most vivid dreams you can imagine. And I was laying on my little bed. It was a little kind of storeroom, and it was a mattress on the floor with a little light beside it. And I always had a pad and a pencil there, and some books and stuff, and my guitar was against the wall. And I was sleeping one night, and I had a dream, and I dreamt that I was, you know, a traveling folk singer, and I was up in front of these people, and I sang this song, and it was If I Needed You. And it was so intense that it woke me up, and I reached over and turned on the light and wrote down the words. There's 3 verses to that song, and then the first verse is repeated. And I knew the guitar part had been so clear that I didn't even get off the mattress and go get my guitar. I remembered it, and I just went back to sleep. And in the morning, we all got up, kind of had coffee and stuff like that. And after that, I said, hey, Guy, listen to this song. And I played If I Needed You with the guitar part, which has never been changed. I played it right the first time. And he said, man, that's a beautiful song. That's yours? I said, yeah. He said, when did you write it? Last night. And I said, no, man, you went to sleep before we did. You couldn't have. Did you get up? And it was like, no, I wrote it in my sleep, and I wrote it down. I woke up long enough to write it down. It's like, wow, that's amazing, man. That's a good one. I talked to you, my first thought was, man, I got to get some more of that codeine cough syrup. I thought about walking in and telling the doctor I just have an open-ended prescription for codeine cough syrup because I needed to make a living, to right. I figured, well, that probably wouldn't fly. I had to change, Larry, one line in that song, where it goes, lady's with me now.
Since I showed her how.
Since I showed her how to lay her lily hand in mine. Well, that line in the dream was, she lowed like a cow when I showed her how. And I sent it off to New York, and they kind of called back to the publishing company, and it was kind of, Towns, that's a beautiful song, but, lowed like a cow, you don't think that's a bit much? Well, okay.
Now, the song that you're probably most well known for, Pancho and Lefty, you were just outside of Dallas when you wrote that one.
30 miles north of Denton.
Tell us the story about that song, how it came to you.
That song, because of Billy Graham and the Guru Maharaji playing Dallas the same time I did, there were no hotel rooms anywhere around Dallas. And my friend Daniel and I ended up in this crummy little rundown place with no Coke machine, no TV, no telephone, and it was about 50 miles out of town was the closest we could get, because Billy Graham drew like 500,000 people from all over the world, and the Guru drew like 300,000. So every room within 60 miles of Dallas was taken. And I sat there for 3 days, and we would had a 3-day gig, and we'd drive into Dallas and play the gig, drive back to this hotel room. And about the second or third day, I decided what I'm going to do is sit down in this chair and write a song, and I'm not going to move, which wasn't terribly difficult because there was nowhere to move to. I could get up and walk out and take a look at the bullfrog in the broken swimming pool. And I sat there for about 3 or 4 hours, and through the window, that first line came. Living on the road, my friend, was going to keep you free and clean. And then something took over. That's another one of the ones I was talking about. The only conscious particular thought I had about that song was, it's not about Pancho Villa. I knew that for a fact. Other than that, it just kind of came. I made no major. I added a verse. I added the last verse. I went in the second night and played it at the Rubaiyat Club, and my late friend B.W. Stevenson was there, and he was a good friend of mine, and he sat there and listened to it. I said, hey, B.W., here's a new song, because he was about the only one in the audience. Everybody else was either Billy Graham or the Guru, and I played it. He said, yeah, man, that's a good song, but I don't think it's finished. Okay? So the next day, I wrote the third verse, and it kind of came to also.
Had you been carrying the characters Pancho and Lefty around in your head?
No, not before that day. I'd never thought of either one.